This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Two German hostages held in Iraq for more than 3 months headed to Baghdad airport early this morning to be flown back home. Meanwhile, police recovered 34 bullet-riddled bodies overnight of men shot dead in apparent sectarian killings in Baghdad.
A suicide bomber blew himself up among a crowd of men waiting to sign up to join the police force in the Iraqi city of Fallujah this morning, killing at least 18 people and wounding over 30. On Tuesday, a suicide bomber drove into a motorcade of Anbar governor Ma'mun Sami Rashid and set off an explosion that killed 10 civilians in the restive provincial capital Ramadi, west of Fallujah. The governor survived what he said was the 9th attempt on his life unharmed. Al-Qaeda Islamists and hardline followers of Saddam Hussein vowed to kill Sunni Arabs who joined the U.S.-sponsored political process. The U.S. military said on Tuesday Iraqi and U.S. troops had killed more than 100 insurgents last week in Ramadi. 2 Iraqi soldiers died, but no Americans. Prime Minister-designate Nouri al-Maliki has said he hopes to name a cabinet embracing majority Shiite, along with Sunnis and Kurds this week, a step many see as vital to quelling the insurgency and stem rising sectarian bloodshed. 4 college students were shot dead in Baghdad's notorious Al-Dura neighborhood this morning. Insurgents set up a checkpoint on the highway in Al-Dura and stopped a minibus full of college students. Police also found 35 bullet-red bodies overnight across Baghdad. Meanwhile, Iraq's ambassador to Germany said today he believed Berlin paid a hefty ransom to secure the release of 2 German engineers who were held hostage in Iraq for over 3 months. The 2 men are expected to arrive in Berlin's Tegel airport later today, but officials were tight-lipped about the circumstances surrounding their kidnap and subsequent release after nearly 100 days in captivity. Separately, Germany's foreign ministry criticized media reports that a ransom was paid to Iraqi kidnappers for the men who were handed over to German authorities in Baghdad yesterday.
In Iraq, more than 25 Iraqis were killed and dozens of others were wounded in a number of terrorist attacks. In another development, 40 bodies were found in several parts of the country. It appeared that the victims had been tortured. In addition, an American civilian was killed and 2 others were injured south of Baghdad.
Several attacks and explosions shocked Iraq, killing and injuring many Iraqis. The most powerful explosion was set off by a suicide bomber strapped with an explosive belt. The terrorist attack targeted a police recruiting center in the city of Fallujah, killing more than 18 recruits and injuring more than 30 others.
The emergency room in the Fallujah Public Hospital received 25 victims who sustained serious injuries and also 6 martyrs.
Meanwhile, 36 bodies were found shot to death in several parts of the Iraqi capital. The victims, who were blindfolded and shackled, also showed signs of trauma, indicating that they had been tortured. In another development, terrorists killed 4 students of the Al-Mamun University at a false checkpoint near the town of Dura. Another explosion targeting a crowded market near the town of Shula went off, killing 2 Iraqis, injuring 15 others, and causing significant property damage.
The explosion went off suddenly. A young boy who sells stereos was burnt. Another older woman was also burnt, and 2 children were hurt as well.
A terrorist driving a booby-trapped vehicle, targeting a military convoy guarding Al-Anbar's governor, blew himself up, killing 10 civilians and injuring dozens of others. The governor survived this assassination attempt. In the aftermath of this terrorist attack, 3 security guards were killed and 15 others were wounded in clashes between the American military military forces in an armed group. In a number of joint military operations, the American and Iraqi military forces killed nearly 100 armed men in the city of Ramadi. The Iraqi military forces announced that they have captured nearly 175 armed fighters, including 5 members of Al-Qaeda. They also killed 30 armed men in a series of security operations during the past few hours.
Armed men affiliated with Fatah, which is led by the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, announced that they have formed an armed force consisting of 1,000 fighters. This new Fatah force will outweigh the new police force formed by Hamas. Meanwhile, Palestinians expressed fear over the formation of these militias, which may lead to clashes among Palestinian factions, thus causing more security disorder and chaos in the Palestinian territories. Nearly 80 fighters from different Fatah cells took part in several training sessions in the Gaza Strip, which has witnessed security deterioration since the Israeli withdrawal last year.
Celebrations for Independence Day 2006 are well underway. Hundreds of thousands of revelers crowded the nation's parks, forests, and nature reserves to take part in the festivities. By 10 a.m. this morning, many locations, attraction sites, and parking lots were filled to capacity. Security forces have been placed on high alert amid over 80 warnings of terror attacks received by the defense establishment, most of them general. Thousands of police, border policemen, and Civil Guard volunteers have been deployed across the country to secure the gatherings. We get more on today's activities from IBA's Ellie Wogelernter.
Today's festivities began with a traditional ceremony for outstanding soldiers held at the presidential residence in Jerusalem. On hand to honor and toast 120 soldiers for excellence were Acting Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Dan Chalutz, former President Yitzhak Navon, and various generals, ministers, and MKs. In his opening remarks, Olmert said, quote, "We hope that future generations will not have to experience war," adding, "The price we'll have to pay for this will be something we can live with happily." Chief of Staff Khalud said that the IDF faces numerous operational challenges in light of the new Hamas government and Iranian threats coming from Tehran. He said that although the IDF does not guarantee complete success, it is definitely doing its best to battle terror on a day-to-day, if not on an hourly basis. The Air Force held its annual Independence Day flyover across the skies of Israel this morning, which included flying over the President's house to salute the distinguished soldiers being honored. Air Force bases in Sde Dov, Ramat David, and Tel Nof were open to the public, as were Navy bases in Haifa and Eilat. The Navy held a festive salute with the participation of missile ships, hundreds of yachts, and a warship from the Turkish Navy. Also this morning, the 42nd Annual International Bible Contest was held at the Jerusalem Theater in the presence of Acting Prime Minister Olmert and President Katsav. 59 Jewish youth from 34 countries in Europe and the Americas, as well as from South Africa, Australia, India, and Turkey, took part in the quiz. First prize went to Adi Damant, a high school student from Jerusalem. The second place shared by 2 other Israelis, Yitzhak Berby and Shira Rosengart. American Yisrael Weinbaum from Flatbush Yeshiva in Brooklyn came in third. And finally, what would Independence Day be without that great Israeli holiday sport, barbecuing? Tens of thousands of vacationers jammed roads and parks to celebrate the day, basking in the perfect weather. Families gathered around grills to prepare the holiday feast by barbecuing meat and other delicacies for everyone to enjoy, if they could find the space to park the grill. Traffic was heavy on many of the country's roads as well as in state parks. Indeed, Ashkelon Park was so crowded by 11 a.m. that police had to close the parking lots and recommended picnickers choose alternate sites. But most everyone had a relaxing day, gathering with family to celebrate Israel's 58th independence. Ellie Wogelernter, IBA News.
Ismail Haniyeh, the Palestinian Prime Minister, confirmed that he will submit to the Legislative Council and to the public a detailed report about the political situation under the imposed siege of the government to prevent it from carrying out its obligations and duties. His statement came during his weekly press conference.
وصلنا إلى نقطة اليوم ومشكلة جديدة هي مشكلة إدخال المال إلى الداخل
Today we reached another problem, the problem of transferring funds into the territories. This problem has many causes. The direct cause is the Israeli occupation as well as the American administration and the weakness of Europe. It is also caused by banks not carrying out their obligations with regard to this issue. Despite all this, the government will not surrender. Last week, we sent to Egypt a high-level delegation from the Ministry of Finance. I personally called the Jordanian Prime Minister, the Saudi Crown Prince Sultan, the Secretary General of the Arab League, the Iranian President, as well as a number of officials to discuss how we can overcome the problem and be able to transfer funds here.
ومع الرئيس الإيراني ومع العديد من المسؤولين من أجل البحث في كيفية التغلب على مشكلة إدخال المال.
In many Syrian provinces, a public donation campaign is being held to support the Palestinian people and their steadfastness in the face of policies that are being carried out by the Israeli occupation forces aimed at humiliating, starving, and bringing the Palestinians to their knees. The fourth day of the donation campaign in a number of provinces coincided with various social, cultural, and economic activities.
Khalid Mish'al, the head of the political office of Hamas, confirmed that Syria is a national model in its Arab role in supporting the Palestinian people. During a speech made at a college at the invitation of Damascus University and the Palestinian Students' Union, Mish'al said that Syrian support was represented by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's encouragement to offer support to the Palestinian people in all forms, whether direct financial aid, opening bank accounts, or launching a national campaign to support the Palestinian people.
واليوم سوريا تكمل مشوارها الأصيل تحتضن قيادة المقاومة.
Today, Syria has continued in its honorable path. It embraces the leadership of the resistance and it welcomes the ministers of the new Palestinian Authority. It offers all kinds of support for them. Syria opens bank accounts for donations. It launches campaigns like the one that was launched on National Day last Sunday and has continued for 11 days to support the Palestinian plight and the people in order to break the siege against them. This is a generous step from the Syrian leadership, the government and the people, as well as President Bashar al-Assad.
Mish'al also spoke about the developments in the region and the unjust isolation of the Palestinian people as a result of their democratic choice. He spoke of the Palestinian resistance and its future, reiterating that the resistance will continue as it is a legal right of the Palestinian people to liberate their land from occupation. Thousands of Palestinians commemorated the tragic day of Al-Nakba, or the catastrophe, which coincides with the Israeli celebration of what they refer to as Independence Day. On this day in 1948, Palestine was robbed of its people who were dispossessed and subjected to forced migration. Palestinians relive the cursed memory of this forceful migration and atrocities they were subjected to in the Zinat village, which lost its entire population. Every tree and pebble on this land has a story to tell, which began 58 years ago. This is the village of Sufariya in the suburb of the Palestinian city of Galilee, which was occupied in 1948. All of its homes were completely destroyed and its residents were forcefully evicted. They were transformed into refugees in neighboring Arab countries. But some fled into nearby Palestinian villages where Israel failed to expel its people. In these villages, some refugees still remember every detail of their story stories about the Nakba.
We were living in the village until November 1949. In 1949, the Israeli military governor came to the village of Kufr Qanna and distributed Israeli IDs. I took an ID and stayed here since then. Some of my family members sought refuge in Lebanon and then they went to Syria. We hear about their news from time to time.
We try to explain to our sons and grandsons how good our lives used to be. We used to have dozens and even hundreds of dunums of land and gardens, but we were forced to leave our land, and then we worked for a long time so that we could buy half a dunum. We were forced to build a very tall building with many stories so that we could house our children.
أهالي صفوريا يترددون بين الفينة والأخرى إلى قريتهم.
The people of Safuria still visit their village, they drink water from its spring and eat some fruits from its remaining trees. Even the new generations that were born years after the Nakba keep those customs alive despite all the changes that happened since the creation of Israel.
من كل التغيرات التي طرأت بوجود إسرائيل.
I do not think that being Arab Israeli citizens contradicts our aspirations to come back to our villages where we were born. We will be here in all cases, whether we live in Shafa Amr or Nadaret. We want to stay here, but we also want to keep our links to these villages.
The story of Safuria village is the typical story of more than 530 Palestinian villages. Their Palestinian residents were forcefully expelled during the Nakba. Today, Palestinians living in Israel commemorated its 58th anniversary by holding a rally and festival on the top of the remnants of the village of Zinat.
We were sending a message to our own people that they must keep the memory of what happened to us in 1948 alive. We are also sending a message to the Israeli public to let them know that they cannot enjoy their independence while they continue to occupy and enslave another nation.
The 58 years that have passed have failed to erase the Palestinian memory of al-Nakba, something the new generations inherit from their fathers and grandfathers, the memory of their lands that were robbed and their homes that were completely destroyed. The State Department released its report about international terrorism, which included a blacklist of countries allegedly supporting terrorism. Iran was on the top of the list, followed by Cuba, Libya, and Syria. In response to this report, Syrian officials said that the American decision to keep Syria on the list stems from the fact that the American interests are contradictory to the Syrians' national interests. Damascus rejects the occupation of Iraq, foreign intervention in Lebanon, and denying the Palestinians their rights.
The State Department's new report adds more tension to the American-Syrian relations, which already have been uneasy to begin with. The American interests are contradictory to the Syrian national interests concerning Iraq. Also, Damascus, which was accused by Washington of supporting terrorism, has been the subject of pressure aimed at forcing it to change its policies. Syria was surprised by the American decision to decrease its diplomatic representations in Damascus and by the report itself, though it supports the Lebanese and Palestinian resistance and opposes the occupation of Iraq.
إذا أرادت الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية أن تقيم علاقات نموذجية وطبيعية وموضوعية مع دول المنطقة.
If the U.S. wants to establish normal and objective relations with countries in the region, it must distance itself from Israel a little bit. The more the U.S. distances itself from the Israeli interests, the closer it gets to Arab countries. This has been true for the past 50 years.
من البلدان العربية هذه معادلة عمرها أكثر من 50 عاما.
وإذ لا تخفى حالة التوتر بين الجانبين بعد
Following a series of United Nations resolutions on Syria, forcing it to end its regional role in Lebanon, Washington has renewed its accusations on Syria for allowing fighters to infiltrate through its borders into Iraq. This compels Syria to end its intelligence cooperation with the United States in its war on terrorism as of last May. The justification that was given by Syria is that the American policies do not consider the Syrian interests in any case.
سوريا بأي حال.
يتحدث
The report said that Syria has taken security measures to control its borders with Iraq and that it previously cooperated with the international community to fight terrorism. This is very accurate, but the report did not add anything new about the offices of the Palestinian groups operating in Syria. In essence, these offices are only political and media offices. Syria does not allow any Palestinian organization to conduct military activities from its territories.
Syrian officials said that Damascus is demanded to do the following: close the offices of the Palestinian organizations, end political support to Hezbollah, and recognize the legitimacy of the American occupation of Iraq. Knowledgeable sources here are concerned that the United Nations might be used by the United States and France to force Syria to withdraw its borders with Lebanon. For the Madar program, Tawfiq Qiyaziji, Abu Dhabi Television, Damascus.
Following up on this subject, we have with us via satellite Syrian parliamentary member Mohammed Habash. Dr. Mohammed, was this expected?
في الواقع تعودنا في كل عام مثل هذه الأيام أن نستمع من الأمريكيين القائمة إياها واضح تماما أن تغيير.
We had become accustomed to hearing about this list every year. Adding or removing names from this list depends on political reasons. Truly, it is not based on human rights or security reasons. America has gotten used to adding the names of those who oppose its policies in the region to the list of countries supporting terrorism. Honestly, the American demands from Syria are impossible to achieve. The Syrian political leadership can't possibly fulfill these demands. The American demands were articulated by the former Secretary of State Colin Powell 3 years ago. He demanded of Syria the protection of the American occupation forces in Iraq, disarming Hezbollah in Lebanon, and silencing the Palestinians. These three demands are impossible to accommodate because the Syrian public rejects them. If we were to take numerous surveys, we would always end up with the same result. The Syrian people want their army to fight the occupation forces, not to protect them. People here are asking, why don't we open a war front in the Golan Heights? Why doesn't the Syrian army go to the Golan? That is how the people here are thinking. But despite this, the Americans are demanding that the Syrian army protect the occupation forces in Iraq.
الناس هنا تتساءل لماذا لا تفتح جبهة الجولان؟ لماذا لا يدخل الجيش السوري إلى الجولان؟ هذا هو رأي الناس وهذا هو رأي الشارع، ومع ذلك الأمريكيون يطالبون الجيش السوري بالتدخل لحماية الاحتلال في العراق.
France and Britain on Wednesday circulated a draft resolution in the United Nations Security Council that would require Iran to freeze its uranium enrichment activities. According to the French news agency Agence France-Presse, the text, also backed by the United States and Germany, invokes Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. But while it expresses serious concern that Tehran has failed to comply with UN demands that it meet non-proliferation obligations, the draft does not call for sanctions. The draft did not give a date for Iran to comply. Iran insists that its nuclear program is peaceful and has rejected demands to end its uranium enrichment program. Senior foreign ministry officials of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany held a strategy meeting in Paris late Tuesday to decide on Iran, but again, Washington failed to drum up support from Russia and China against Tehran.
Expressing frustration with Russia and China that repeatedly voiced opposition to any sanction or use of force against Iran, U.S. Undersecretary of State Nicholas Burns said, "It's time for countries to take responsibilities, especially those countries that have close relationships with Iran."
Countries have to use their influence. Countries that have influence with Iran should use it. And if countries are allowing dual-use exports to be sent to Iran, they ought to stop it. If countries like Russia continue to sell arms to Iran, we think they ought to stop the arms sales.
In reaction, Tehran said U.S. foreign policy is lacking in logic. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Hamid Reza Safi said the White House has chosen the language of threat to push its objectives forward. The senior spokesman added Washington is trying to transfer its domestic crisis to the rest of the world, adding obviously the U.S. has lost international trust. That is why it started imposing its policies. Asafi reaffirmed Tehran disregarding the threats will take its route. As for the statement released by the French Foreign Ministry after Paris meeting, Asafi noted Tehran's nuclear program is based on Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, saying IAEA reports confirm the peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program. Elsewhere in his remarks, Asafi pointed out that the Islamic Republic of Iran, as a holder of nuclear know-how, will in no way refuse its legitimate right. French Foreign Ministry at the close of Paris gathering had claimed the nuclear program pursued by Iran poses concern to the international community, saying the UN Security Council must follow up the case with a firm resolve.
The 19th International Book Fair opened Wednesday at the Permanent Fairgrounds in Tehran. Over 2,754 domestic and foreign publishers are displaying over 283,000 different titles of books in a wide array of fields, among them religion, philosophy, literature, arts, and history.
Accompanied by Minister of Culture and Islamic Guidance Mohammad Hossein Safar Harandi, Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad paid a visit to some pavilions of the exhibition. Following the visit, President Ahmadinejad told the participants at the opening ceremony that the overall policy of his government is to support books and book reading. President Ahmadinejad went on to say nearly 150,000 titles of foreign books have been subsidized by Iran's Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance. The Iranian president also called on the ministry to provide such support for domestic publishers. This year's exhibition plays host to representatives from 15 international unions and organizations. 25 meetings are scheduled to be held on the sidelines of the exhibition, where scholars are to present articles and deliver speeches on the Prophet Muhammad. The exhibition runs until May 13th.
The Sri Lankan Authority held an armed group affiliated with the Tamil rebels responsible for the suicide attack on Tuesday that injured a number of soldiers from the Special Security Forces in the northern state of Vinoa. The Sri Lankan security forces stepped up police presence in the streets of the capital of Colombo and staged checkpoints around its perimeters. They also cordoned off main streets leading to the Sri Lankan capital.
A female suicide bomber carried out an attack inside the headquarters of the Sri Lanka Army leadership, injuring the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The Sri Lanka police and security forces were put on high alert and were fully deployed in and around Colombo and in the northern parts of the country. In its widest security operation since the Civil War, the Sri Lankan police and army forces staged checkpoints on major intersections.
Security in Colombo has been tightened since the attack on the army headquarters. Our law enforcement and security agencies took a number of strict precautionary measures, including the closure of several boulevards in Colombo, staging checkpoints, and conducting thorough search operations.
According to a number of observers and mediators that brokered the peace agreement between the Sri Lankan government and the Tamil rebels, the attack on the Sri Lankan army headquarters and the government response in the aftermath does not constitute a return of the civil war. Meanwhile, the Sri Lankan air and naval forces continue for the second consecutive day to pound the northeastern region of Trinkuma. Thousands of Muslim villagers have fled the region and dozens of others were killed and injured. According to Tamil leaders, the government offensive operations, including the random arrests, were racially motivated. None of the armed groups affiliated with the Sri Lankan resistance have claimed responsibility for the Tuesday attack on the army headquarters. However, the Sri Lankan Authority holds the rebels affiliated with the Tamil freedom fighters responsible for the attack. The ceasefire is at stake, especially since the Sri Lankan government-backed forces continue to pound predominantly Muslim regions. This escalation may lead to a return in guerrilla warfare, which had reached the heart of the Sri Lankan capital by the rebels in the north.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin. This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs which connect you to the world.